Welcome! In this Blender tutorial, we're going to carve a realistic road into a mountainous landscape and create a dynamic material that blends snow, grass, and rock. This is something that's often needed in your games and can be quite difficult to do. Now, I know from experience how tricky Blender can feel, so I'm going to guide you through every single click and action that I take. The only thing you need to know is how to navigate the 3D viewport and the basics of adding and removing objects. For reference, I'm using Blender 5.0 for this, so if you want to use the exact same version as me, you know what to get. And with that in mind, let's make a start. So before we make a start in Blender, a quick word on the assets. You're going to need 3 sets of materials, one for grass, one for rock, one for snow. You need to make sure, please, that each set has at least a diffuse, a normal, and a roughness texture. And you'll also need a seamless road texture, preferably square, otherwise things are going to look a little bit weird. I've taken here a quick snapshot of what I have. So for example, in the grass folder here, I've got the grass diffuse, the normal, and also the roughness. If you don't know where to get hold of textures, a really good resource is Polyhaven. I'm on polyhaven.com/textures. You can select and search for any texture you like. When you do go to a specific one you do like, if you go up onto the right-hand side, there's a menu there. I took 2K. Here, the minimum you need for this tutorial is to download the diffuse, the normal GL, and the roughness, and you should be good to go. Okay then, so let's make a start. I've just started up Blender with a fresh project and I've got the default scene here in front of me. The first thing I'm going to do in the right hand side in the scene collection is left click on the cube and right click and then delete the cube. Then to make a landscape, we're going to use an add-on for this. That add-on is called A.N.T landscape. If you don't have it, you can go to edit and then to preferences. In the preferences, if you go to the add-ons, just check here whether you actually have A.N.T landscape. If you've never installed it, you probably don't. So to get it, we can go to get extensions. I'm going to click allow online access here. Then in the search extensions, type LAND for land. There's A.N.T landscape. I'm going to click on the install. That should install it after a couple of seconds. And then once it's installed, check the add-ons and make sure it's here in the list with the checkbox checked. So I'll close that down and we're ready to go. So let's use the add-on to create a landscape. So I'm going to go to add, mesh, and landscape. And then in the little menu down here, I'm going to click the arrow. That'll open up all of the options. As it is, the landscape is really unrealistically high, so I want to lower that. So just scrolling down a bit, I'm going to change the height from 0.5 to 0.25, hit enter, and then click in the interface here just to deselect the landscape, and we're good to go. Selecting the landscape on the right-hand side in the scene collection, if I click this little arrow here to open up the transform menu, we can see that the size is 2 meters by 2 meters. That's a little bit small. So I'm going to click and drag on the X, Y, Z, let go, type 150, press enter to up the scale, and then zoom right out with the mouse wheel so I can see the landscape here, and it's now 300 meters by 300 meters. We need to make sure the scale is 1 here for the mesh operations we'll do later on rather than 150. So with the landscape selected on the right hand side, I'm going to go to Object and then to Apply and apply the scale, so the scale goes to 1 there. With that done, I'm going to close the transform menu by pressing N for November on my keyboard, and that makes a bit more space. And to make things a little bit easier later on to see, what I'd like to do is darken this a bit. So with the landscape selected on the right hand side, I'm going to click the material down the bottom here, click New, and then I'm going to call this a landscape. And then scroll down, and if you scroll down to the bottom, there should be viewport display. This changes then just the shading in the viewport as we're working. I'm going to click the color here and just choose something a little bit darker like this. This is going to make it easier to see what we're doing with the path in a short while if I could choose a color. Anyway, yeah, I think that'll do. So I'll click back into the middle and we can now start building our path. So to do this then, we're going to add a path. So I'm going to go to add, curve, and path here. On the right hand side in the scene collection, that's added this Nurbs path. I'm going to select the Nurbs path, click on the orange square on the right hand side and just change the name to road path. And then go into side view with view, viewpoints, and right in this case. The orange dot shows where it is. I'd like to lift it above the landscape, so I'm going to select it on the right hand side and then press G for golf, Z for Zulu, and then just move the mouse so the orange dot goes above, somewhere above the landscape, and hit enter. Now we're above landscape, I'm going to go to view, viewpoint, and top view, so we're in top view, and then press G for golf and move the dot where the path is over to the top left hand side. That looks good to me. I'll hit enter. So now we need to draw our path. First, I'd like to focus in on it because we're really zoomed out. So I'm going to go to View and Frame Selected. That zooms us in on the path. And then go to Edit Mode by top left, changing from Object Mode to Edit Mode. Make sure you have the road path selected when you do this. At the moment, we have 5 points by default, and they're all selected. I'm going to left click with the mouse button to deselect those. Then I'm going to zoom out a bit, pan this across, select the final point, and we can start using that final point to draw our road. The way we can do this is by pressing G for golf to actually move the points around. You can see the black line, which is going to be our road. Left click to set, and if you want to add a point, select the final point, press E for echo, and move that, and you can see that then add some points in. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit now because they're pretty close to each other, and then press the E and left mouse button in combinations to draw some kind of reasonable looking road around the edges of the landscape here. And I'm sure you get the idea of how this is working, so what I'm going to do is speed this up and try and draw a halfway realistic looking road. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with the path drawn there. What I'd like to do now is wrap this onto our landscape. To do this, we can come out of Edit Mode, go into Object Mode, Then on the right hand side, make sure the road path is selected, and let's make a copy of this so we can always revert back if something goes wrong. So I'm going to go to Object, Duplicate Objects, and then hit Escape to set it in the original position. Then we can hide the original road path here by clicking the I. And then with the road path 001 selected and the object properties here, this little orange square, I'm going to change the name here to road path wrapped. To wrap this then to the landscape, we need to apply a modifier. So with the road path wrap selected in the scene collection, I'm going to click the spanner here for the modifiers, click Add Modifier, and then in the search, you want to type shrink, or SH in my case. It comes up with deform shrink wrap. I'll left click on that, then move this to the left so you can actually see something. Then we want the wrap method to be project. We want the axis Z to be selected. We want the negative and the positive, and then click the white square next to target and select our landscape, and that should wrap us nicely onto the landscape, which it seems to have done. Once we're happy with that, we can apply this modifier, so we can click the down arrow next to shrink wrap and go to apply. Now when we click the apply, you'll notice some of the curve disappears. It's simply applying actually based on the number of points that we have in the curve, so some of it is cut through the landscape, which I actually want because it's going to leave a nice effect later on when we carve our road into the landscape itself. The next step now is to actually use this path as a guide for a plane which we're going to use to cut into our landscape. To do that, I'd like to set the origin of this particular path right at the start of the path. So I'm going to go to View and to Viewpoint and to Top View and zoom out. At the moment, the origin is right up here. I'm going to go to View and Frame Selected, and then zoom right in on this so we can actually see the path here, and go from Object Mode into Edit Mode so we can see the points. On the right hand side, I'm going to click the eye and hide the landscape actually as well. That makes things a bit easier. Select the first point here, and then do Shift and S for Sierra and cursor to selected. That now puts this little red and white cursor at the first point. Then come out of Edit Mode, so go back into Object Mode at the top left, and then go to Object, Set Origin, and Origin to 3D Cursor. This will help us later on when we start adding the mesh pieces all the way along our curve to make our road. Speaking of which, we can now start that. We're going to do this in a two-step process. We're going to cut a path into the landscape which will be wider than the road, and then we'll add the road onto that path. So I'm going to select Collection on the right-hand side, then go to Add, Mesh, and Plane, and that's added the plane right at our cursor. And the origin being there means it's also added it right at the start of the path as well. On the right-hand side, I'm going to select the plane, go to the Object Properties, and change this to Cutter Piece, so we know what it is. Then click the Materials tab, make a new material. I'm going to call this Cutter, and then scroll all the way down to the viewport display and make this some kind of different color to the landscape, just so we can see it later on. Now, as I said, we're going to use this cutter piece to actually cut our path into our landscape. And for that to work properly, we need this to be wider than what will eventually be the road. So I'm going to press N for November to open up the transform menu and select the X and the Y here and type 3 to make this 3 meters by 3 meters. With that done, we need to reset this scale. So making sure the cutter piece is selected, I'm going to go to Object, Apply and Scale. So the scale is back to 1. Then press N for November to close that menu. Before we go and extend this along the curve, what I'd like to do is slice it up a little bit so that we get less jaggedness around the edges. To do that, with the cutter piece selected, let's go into Edit Mode, and I'm going to left click to deselect everything, then zoom in a little bit here. And to do this, we want what's known as the Loop Cut tool. To get that, I'm going to do Control and then R for Romeo on the keyboard. Doing that, you can see the Cuts 1 and Smoothness 0 has appeared at the top here, and down the bottom, there are some keyboard shortcuts. There's a page up and page down for the number of cuts, and also the middle mouse button. You'll need either the middle mouse button or the page up or page down. If you hover the mouse now over the cutter piece, you'll see these yellow lines appear. If you don't see them, it'll be because the mouse is in the middle or off the shape altogether. You need to be on the edges. What we want to do is slice in the Y direction here. So if I hold the mouse on the edge here, I can see a yellow line appear in the Y. I'm now going to tap page up, page up, page up, and page up to make 5 lines there, then hit enter and enter again, and that's then sliced that up. So I'll click off this somewhere in the grid, and that's now ready to go on our curve. With that done, what we can do then is come back out of edit mode and go into object mode. Now notice my view was behaving a bit oddly there, so I'm going to go to view and frame selected. That's better. And now we're ready to create copies of these and get them to fit along our curve. It's probably a good idea to back up our cutter piece. So with the cutter piece selected, I'm going to go to Object, Duplicate Objects, hit Escape to set that in the same position. Then on the right-hand side, click the eye next to cutter piece to hide it. Select our new cutter piece 001. Go to the Object Properties here, scroll up. I'd like to change the name of this actually to Cutter Piece Path. Hopefully then later on we know what it is. So with that done, what we can do then is get this to multiply itself along the curve, which we'll do with a couple of modifiers. So clicking the spanner on the modifiers, make sure you have the cutter piece path selected, click Add Modifier, and then in the search, you want to look for the Array modifier. Now there is a new Array modifier with Blender 5, and then the legacy one, which is the old one. The new one actually does what we're about to do with both modifiers contained in one. Unfortunately, it's a little bit buggy and I've tried it quite a few times and we don't get a very good mesh and we get some strange artifacts. So hopefully it's okay with you. We're going to use the legacy one here, which does exactly what we need. So I'm going to left click on the array legacy, then change the fit type to fit curve, then click the white square next to the curve here and select our road path wrapped. That will now create all of the instances that we need to fit our curve. Then I'm going to minimize the array by clicking the down arrow on the left hand side, click add modifier, click search, and we want to search here for the curve modifier, so deform curve. Here then the object we're selecting is the road path wrapped, and what you should find there if we zoom out is you actually are wrapped nicely and fitting along your curve. If you find the length isn't correct, it's more than likely because you didn't reset the scale to 1, so please make sure you do that on the cutter piece. Now one thing you may notice when you zoom on this is that we are sloped, which is not very realistic for a road. That's because by default when we make paths in Blender, the points are actually twisted. So we can turn that off by selecting our road path wrapped here, then going down to the data properties, so selecting this little green icon. You'll see the twist method is minimum. If we change that to Z up, that'll now flatten the path nicely. And that's pretty cool. So we can go up to the cutter piece path and we can apply these modifiers. So I'll select the modifiers here. We need to do it in order we added them. So I'll click the drop down arrow by the array and click apply, and then the drop down arrow by the curve and click apply. Now we've done that, we can unhide the landscape and you should be able to see now that we've got our path cut sort of into the landscape. What we need to do now is we need to actually get the landscape eroded away and modify the mesh a little bit. To start this off, we're going to take a look at the cutter piece path mesh. So with the cutter piece path selected, I'm going to hide the landscape to make things a little bit easier to see, and then go into edit mode, and then go to view and viewpoint and top, so we see it from the top, and zoom out quite a bit as well. Now you may or may not have things selected in here, so I don't have anything at the moment, but in case you do, just left click somewhere on the grid, that will deselect everything. At the top, please make sure that the vertex select mode is selected, so not this one, but this one here, the vertex mode. Then put the mouse in here somewhere, and I'm going to press A for alpha to select all of the vertices. Now if I zoom in with the mouse and pan across, you can see all of the vertices here. When the array modifier created all of these pieces, it will have overlapped vertices on top of each other, and for what we're going to do later on, we don't need that. We need to merge close vertices together. So to do this merging, we can go to Mesh, Merge, and Merge by Distance. When we click that down the bottom, you can see remove 700 vertices, and we can see the distance that was used here for the removal. Now I know from a bit of prep already that we can actually set this to quite a generous distance, 0.01 for example. I'll hit enter, and we still have, that's a good sign, 702 removed. So we've now been able to remove any vertices that were quite close to each other in this mesh. So what I'll do is click off there, and then go from edit mode back into object mode. Now we need to deal with the landscape and the cutting. I'm going to unhide the landscape, so we're back to where we were, and then zoom a little bit into here, and then select the landscape, and then with the modifiers tab selected, click add modifier, search, and we need the shrink wrap modifier again, so deform and shrink wrap. Then what we're going to do is wrap by project, Z-axis, click the negative, and the target is going to be the cutter piece path. And when we do that, you'll see that it does shrink, but we do have some problems. We have meshes on top of it, and also we'll have some gaps underneath where it's sticking out as well. The reason for this, we can see if we go to the wireframe mode. So if we click here at the top to wireframe shading, the issue is when it's shrink wrapping, it's trying to match the vertices on its own mesh to the vertices on the path here. And the issue is fairly clear. I think we don't have enough vertices inside the mesh here to fit with all of the vertices on the path. It's done its best, but it doesn't give us a very good effect. So what we need to do is we need to make the mesh much, much finer. Now we could do this simply by dividing the entire mesh up, but if I go to view and viewpoint and top and zoom out a bit, we do have quite a big mesh with our landscape, and none of the mesh in the middle or around the edges here is actually needed to be fine at all. It's quite okay as it is. And if we were using this for a game, we would actually want to keep the number of vertices in our mesh to a minimum, fewer vertices, easier processing for the computer. So ideally, what we want to be able to do is actually divide up our mesh, but only in the vicinity of the path. And we can do this by using something very famous called geometry nodes. So what I'm going to do then with the landscape selected on the right hand side here is press the cross next to the shrink wrap because we don't need that anymore. And then with the landscape selected here, I'm going to go to Object, Duplicate Objects, hit Escape to set it in position, hide the original landscape by clicking the eye on the right hand side, selecting the landscape 001, clicking the object properties and changing the name here to landscape divided. Now we can divide this mesh up in the vicinity of the road. To do this, I'm going to click the modifiers, add modifier, search, type GE, and you should find there add modifier geometry nodes. I'm going to left click on that. That adds a geometry nodes modifier. We need to add a set of nodes. So I'm going to click the new here and call this divide mesh. And now something you might want to do here when you're developing these is actually click this shield. By checking that to blue, you actually keep this node set up even if it's not applied to any mesh inside the scene. If you don't click the shield and you delete something that has your nodes applied, the nodes will be deleted as well, which can be a little bit annoying if you've taken a long time to set them up. And with that done, we can now go into the geometry nodes workspace at the top. So I'm going to click the geometry nodes there, and then zoom out a lot here because I can't see anything, and it would be a good idea to be in wireframe view. So I'm going to use the middle mouse button to scroll along and click the wireframe here. Now, if you're not familiar with geometry nodes, unfortunately, they often get presented as something to avoid or as something really complicated. I think actually the opposite is true. I wish I'd known about these on day one of learning Blender because they just make your life a lot easier. Essentially, what you have are nodes. Those are these things here. And you have an input node, which is the geometry coming in, which in our case is a landscape mesh. Then you have an output node, which is what you get out after your modifier has been applied, which, because the input is connected to the output, we've got exactly the same mesh. If I left click on the green here and drag and let go, the mesh disappears because we have nothing going into the output, so I'll connect that back up. So what we need to do is we need to divide our mesh near to our road. To be able to do that, what we need to do is we need to know which vertices of the landscape here are close to the vertices of the road here, and we can use that then to select and divide up our mesh. To do that, we're going to compare the positions of the vertices on the road with the positions of the vertices on the landscape, and the vertices that are within a certain distance, those are the ones that we're going to need. However, we have to be a little bit careful there because when we do the position comparison, it will be in 3D, so using the Z. So if we had something really extreme where we had a vertex really steeply above the path that we do want to be included in our division mesh, its distance will actually be really big because it's a long way away in the Z. Therefore, what we're actually going to do inside the geometry nodes here is we're going to flatten both of these meshes so that the Z is 0, and then we'll compare them essentially in the X and Y to give us our distance. That's effectively like looking at it from top down effectively and then dividing the mesh. And in fact, I'll go to top view so it's a little bit easier to see as well. So to make a start, we need the geometry information actually from the path. So I'm going to grab the cut a piece path with the left mouse button, drag and drop that into here. That adds an object info node into here. I'll try and make a little bit more space in the hope that you can actually see something. There we go. So we now have our object info for our cut a piece path. I'm going to reselect the landscape divided. I think that makes things a little bit easier to see. Okay, so what we want to do is set the geometry of our cut a piece path to be flat. To do that, I'm going to, with the mouse cursor around here, do Shift and A for alpha, and then in the search here, type POSI, and you should find the geometry right set position. We can do this to, funnily enough, set the position of geometry. I'll plug the geometry from the path into the geometry of the set position here, and now we need to set the position that we're wanting to set. That is this object's position with the Z set to 0. Now, the way we do this is a tiny bit counterintuitive, and this is probably the biggest problem when you start using geometry nodes. You add nodes in, and it calculates what you're using once it knows where you're going. So what we're going to do with the mouse cursor around here is Shift and A for alpha, search, and I'd like to find a position node, and that will read in the position from this. It doesn't look like it yet, but it'll know what to do once it's connected up to here. Before that, though, I'd like to drag out from here, type SEP, and you should find separate X, Y, Z. And that allows us to separate up the X, Y, and Z. Then we can drag from the X, type COM, and you should find combine X, Y, Z. Then we can plug the Y into here and leave the Z at 0. Plug this vector into the position, and that should actually have flattened our geometry. We can look at that actually by plugging this into the geometry output, and you can see that our road has been flattened. You will also have noticed that the road has moved. That's because we're using the original coordinates and not relative to this particular mesh. So we'll click the relative here, and that brings it then back into position. It's just now completely flat on the floor, which is what we need. Now we want to compare the position of this with the flattened landscape. So I'll zoom out a little bit here. I'm hoping you can see things. I'm going to move those off the top there. You can always wind back and have a look what's there if you need to. So with the cursor around here, I'm going to do Shift and A, search, and we want to add a geometry proximity node. So I've typed PRO and X, and you can see geometry sample, geometry proximity. So I'll left click on that. That gives us then a distance of some geometry compared with some other geometry. So we're wanting to use actually the geometry from our path here. So I'll go out of this one into this geometry, and the sample position is actually going to be the landscape, but flattened again. I'd like to first of all zoom out and just disconnect this actually as well and move this along here. Okay, so to do this, we're actually going to do exactly what we've done here with these nodes here. So I'm going to select these, Shift select them, do Control and C to copy, put the mouse cursor around here, Control and V to paste, or Command and V on the Mac, and that should drop all of those in here, and we can now drag this vector into the sample position, and that will now compare the flattened geometry of the road with the flattened geometry of the landscape. And we're nearly there with actually selecting our mesh. What we can do is actually show that. So I've gone into 3D here. I'm going to go to View and Viewpoint and Top, so we can see that from the top again. Then dragging out from the distance here, I'll let go and type LESS, and we want a compare and less than here. And then let's do a distance of say less than 8 meters. So I'll type 8 in the B here. And then the selection that we have here will be all of the faces that are within this certain distance. What we can do then is delete those from the original geometry. So I'm going to drag the input along here, move the input out here, and then do a Shift A somewhere here, search, type delete, and we want delete geometry, and I'll put that here. The selection we have is what's coming from the result here. The input geometry is what we have here. We want face instead of point. And then we can plug this into the output. And you can see now that we've got our landscape geometry here, but we've deleted all of the mesh that's surrounding our road. So if I go to view and viewpoint and top, we now no longer have the mesh around the road. Now we're really far away from here actually, so we could go closer. I was wondering about that. So if I type 5 here, we get quite a bit closer to the road. Could probably even get away actually with 4 here maybe. The smaller the better, because we're about to really divide the mesh up that's close by, but I think that should do. Cool, okay. So next up, we want to do the reverse. We want to select the stuff that's closer, and then we're going to divide that up so it's much finer. So I'm going to take the result here, type N-O-T for not, Boolean math not, and this is now the inverse of that selection. So moving along here, I'm going to do Shift and A, search, and we're going to add another delete geometry, and we'll take again our input geometry into here. So now we've done the inverse. So if we plug this into the output and select faces from here, you can see that we've now got the inverse geometry, and this is what we need to divide up. So I'll take this out of here. We're then going to drag this out and type sub, and you should find the subdivide mesh. And then let's plug this actually into the geometry here so we can take a look. So we can already see that we've got 9,000 rows in this geometry here. And if I unplug this and plug the original geometry back in there, we've got 14,000 rows, so 14,000 vertices in this case. That's not a lot. When you start going to the millions, it tends to be a lot. So I'll unplug this, plug this back into here, and I'm going to go up to level 3. And we've still only got 140,000, which is really good. And the main thing now is just to see whether we have enough. We definitely have enough to match up to here, which looks good. Okay then, so I'll unplug that from there and move this over here. We now have, with this delete geometry and this subdivide mesh, both of the pieces that we need. So we're going to merge these back together. So I'm going to drag out of here and type JOI for join geometry. And we can use this to join these back together. Now scroll this along a little bit, move this to here, and then we can merge by distance. And that'll get rid of any sort of strangely duplicated vertices or anything like that. Plug those into the final output here. And what we should have now is our landscape geometry with a really nicely divided mesh close to the path, and we can use that to shrink wrap. So I'm going to come out of the geometry nodes view and go back into layout actually at the top here. Then also switch to the solid view. And now hopefully happy with that, we can apply our geometry nodes. So we're going to click the down arrow here and click apply. And that now applies that to the mesh. So if we hit wireframe, we can see our mesh, and come back out, we can see this. So with the drum roll then, with the landscape divided selected, the modifiers tab selected, we can add a modifier. We want to add the shrink wrap modifier. Then we want to project, axis Z, negative, and the target here is going to be our cut piece path. And what you should see now is that's cut, hopefully, nicely for you, the path, and I can see it has, into the landscape. Cool, that actually looks pretty good. And if we're happy with that, what we can do is click the down arrow here and apply that, and that's now fixed. Don't worry about the clashes of the colours and things going on here, that's just Z fighting, they're at exactly the same level, therefore it doesn't know often which to draw first, so you get one or the other. So what we can do now is concentrate on drawing our road. So I'm going to select the collection on the right hand side here, and then go to add, mesh, and plane. And then on the right hand side, change the name of the plane by going to the object properties here and change this to road piece. Then I'm going to go to view and frame selected so we can see it, and also hide our landscape divided. That's going to make things a little bit easier. So with the road piece here, the first thing we need is our texture. So on the right hand side, make sure you have road piece selected. What I'm going to do is click the material tab, new, change the material name here to road. Then we can go to the shading viewport at the top. Yay, more nodes for you. And then opening up my assets, I'm going to drag and drop this into here. And that creates us a node for our texture. We can simply plug then the color of this into the principal BSDF. And that's all we need to do there. So I'm going to go back to the layout here. And if we switch at the top here to the material preview view, I'm going to hide the cut piece path a little bit better. And you can see that we've got the texture here. Now, an important thing to note here is in my case, the texture is going along the Y and we need to go along the Z. So what I'm going to do is press N for November to open up the transform menu. And then in the rotation, select the Z, type 90, hit enter. And we need to make sure that we apply that. So I'm going to press N for November to close that, go to object, apply, and rotation. Press N for November to open that again, and the rotations are all 0. The important thing is that we're facing now along the Z axis. Next, I'd like to put some sides on the road as well. So we're going to, at the top left, go to edit mode. Then select the button for edge selection here. I'm going to click off to deselect everything. Left click on this edge here, hold down shift, left click on this one here. Then E for echo on the keyboard, Z for Zulu to control it in the Z, and drag down a bit until the deflection is around -0.4 or so, and hit enter. Then I'll left click somewhere on the grid to get rid of the menu, and we've got sides on our road. What we need to do now is cut it up. To do that, we'll loop cut. So I'll do Control and R for Romeo. We can see the control is open because I've got cuts 1 smooth this 0, and also the shortcuts down here. I'm going to hover with the mouse as before, and then tap page up a few times. That'll be enough, I think. Hit enter, and that's chopped up our road nicely. So at the top, we can go for edit mode back into object mode. Next up then, what I'd like to do is duplicate our road piece. So I'm going to go to Object and then Duplicate Objects. Hit Escape to set that in place. Hide the original road piece. Find our new one. Go to the Object Properties. And I'm going to call this Road Piece Path. And hit Enter. Then we can go to the Modifiers tab. We're going to add a modifier, Search. Find the Array Legacy modifier. We want to do Fit Curve. Select the Road Path Wrapped. Then minimize the modifier on the top left here. Then add modifier, Search and Curve. Then the curve object is the road path wrapped. And if we zoom out a bit, we should see that our road is now fitting really nicely to the path. And it seems to be. We have a black line down the middle here. That's the actual path. So what I'm going to do is hide the road path wrapped, so that disappears. And now bring back the cutter piece path by unhiding that. So we're conflicting this because of the height. So with the road piece path selected, I'm going to press N for November to open out the menu here. We can see we are a Z of 0.93. I'm going to click on that and make that a little bit higher, maybe 0.98 or something like that. Could maybe even be a little bit more, but actually that doesn't look too bad, I don't think at all. So we now have our road here as well. So I'll press N for November to close that menu. What we can do now is go back actually into the viewport shading solid, and I'm going to unhide the landscape divided. And we can now see the road with the cut path and also the landscape, which is pretty cool. So we're done now with adding the road. What we want to do is shade the landscape. So let's go to the shading viewport at the top. Then we're going to click the selector here and find out a landscape material, which at the moment has very little going on. So the first thing we need to do in here is add in our texture sets. So I've got 3 images here for the grass. That's the diffuse, the normal, and the roughness. I'm going to select all 3 of these and drag and drop these into here, which makes some nodes. Then I'm going to minimize all of them. Otherwise, you are not going to be able to see anything. And where's the roughness one gone? It's gone here. So I'll zoom back in and minimize that as well. So I've got 3 textures here. These are for the grass. And I'm going to plug the diffuse into the base color, plug the normal into the normal, and plug the roughness into the roughness here. Then I'm going to do Shift and Add in here to add, and type PRI for Principled BSDF. Drop one of those in here. And now I'm going to do the same procedure for the rock textures that I had, and then also for the snow textures. We'll end up with 3 of these BSDFs, taking in 3 textures for each. So I'm going to fade out and be right back. So hopefully you've managed to do that. I've added in the grass, the wall, and the snow here, all plugged into the normal roughness and the diff into the base color. So when we've done that, you may notice that we've got little bits of a sludge here, and that's because the materials need scaling correctly on the landscape. The other thing I noticed whilst we're here as well is we've lost the road texture, and our cutter piece path is showing some white there. So on the right hand side, I'm going to hide the cutter piece path. The road texture is a really interesting one. I'm going to go back to the layout viewport here, select the road piece path on the right hand side here, go to the material tab, and hello, select road here. There we go. I'll go back to the shading editor then, and now we have a road. That's a little bit better. So I'm going to select the landscape divided on the right hand side. And what we can do is get rid of our sludge. So sludge elimination, I'm going to go over here and do Shift and A for alpha to add a new node. And here we're going to add in a texture coordinate node. Grab the object information and type MAP, and we want mapping and vector here. And then we can use the scale here to scale things down. So I'm going to go out from this vector into the aerial grass, and you can already see above that strange things are happening. We've got this very sort of checkered pattern here. We need to reduce the scale here a lot. So I'm going to select these and type 0.0, maybe 0.1. And let's have a look at that here. How does that look? That's actually already not too bad. Okay, I thought I would have to do something different, but I think that's okay. So I'm going to click the arrow here just to minimize that because of space. And now we need to scale the other textures as well. So I'm going to copy that. We could use the same one, but maybe you want some flexibility. So I'll come out of the object into here and plug this also into these. And then hopefully you get the idea here, because space is at a premium. I'm going to copy this one, paste this here, also come out of the object and plug these into these 3 as well. Okay, so hopefully that's clear to you there. I'm aware that it's a video and zooming, so I'm just going to quickly allow you to be able to pause it there if you need to check what's going on. So I've got the texture coordinate, the 3 mappings, then these 2 mappings down the bottom here, one going into the quarry, which is the rocks in my case, and the other one then into the snow. What I'd like to do is quickly check the look of each of these. So at the moment, the output from the grass is going into here. I'm going to do the output from the rock. Yeah, that looks okay. And the output from the snow. And Yeah, that looks okay as well. So I'll disconnect that and put the grass back in here. Good. Now what we want to do then is we want to blend the snow and the grass. Now, as I say that, I think actually I've got the rocks and everything the wrong way around here, haven't I? So let's have a look. Yes, I need the snow above the rocks here. Sorry about that. So I'm going to zoom out here and hopefully you can see what's going on, but I'm going to select the mapping, these here, and drag these below here. And then select that and these and drag those up a little bit, drag you out the way, node spaghetti here. That's a little bit better. Okay, so what I wanted was the snow and the grass close to each other so we can blend them. So to blend these two together then, in the material output here, I'm going to zoom in and do Shift A for alpha here, search, and we want a mix and shader in this case. And then I'm going to plug the output of the grass into this one and the output of the snow into this one here. Then plug the output of the shader into the material output, and you'll see that we've got the sort of blend between the two, and we can blend using this factor here. What we're going to do is set this factor based on the height actually, and that'll set then the blending. So the higher up we are, the more likely we are to have snow. So to do that then, at the top here, I'm going to do Shift A, search, and we want another texture coordinate node. Then we'll take the object and we'll separate the XYZ, and we're interested here purely in the Z. So we're going to go from there into a map range. And we want to take the range that we have for Z, which is from minimum to maximum. At the moment it says 1 meter. But if we go back to layout actually and select our landscape divided, and I press N for November, it's actually a height of, let's say, 48 meters. So I'll press N for November to close that, go back into the shading viewport, and we're going up to 48 meters here. And if we just quickly take a look at the factors, the higher the factor is, up to 1 here, the more snow we have, the lower it is, the more grass we have. And we're remapping our 0 to 48 from 0 to 1 here. So to get our factor, we can come out the result and we'll use a color ramp for this. There's a few nodes we could use, steps and things like that, but this one allows us to play quite easily visually with this. So what I'm going to do is resize this a little bit. We're going to come out of the color here and actually go into the factor with the mix shader, which you absolutely cannot see there. So let me move this along like this. Hopefully that's a little bit clearer. So we've got the texture coordinate going into separate, going into map range, going into the color ramp, coming out of there and into here and into the surface. And what you'll see that we can do now is we can adjust these to set the amount of snow that we'd like and the kind of blending, which I think looks pretty cool, actually. Give it a bit of a more blended snow line. That is not too bad. And with that done, that leaves us with one last thing to do, and that's another mix shader, this time to blend in the rocks. Now we need the rocks, so I'm going to drag these along here like this, and then zoom in and move the material output down here a little bit. Then we can do Shift A, and we'll add in another mix shader here. So we want to mix the result of the snow and the grass with the rocks. So I'll drop that in here. So we're going to take the output of this one and go into the lower input here, and then the output of the rocks go into the higher one, and plug the output of that to here. And again, we're going to do a similar thing now based on the steepness, actually. We're going to be setting this factor here. So to do that, we need the geometry and we need the normals. So the normals is a vector facing directly out from a face. Luckily, we can get hold of the geometry, so we can do a Shift and A here, search, and we want to find the input geometry. On the geometry here, we have the normals. So we'll make a dot product of this. And here we want a dot product purely with the Z, so 0, 0, and 1. Then we'll drag out of this, and we can add ourselves in a color ramp, which will allow us to do exactly what we did with the other one. I'll move this along a little bit. Hopefully you can still see everything. I'll drag this and drag this as well, and drag this up to here. We'll plug the color into the factor of this mix shader here. Now what you should find is you're able to adjust the color ramp here to actually set, there we go, a nice rock effect based on steepness on the landscape as well. So if I drag this down a bit and just zoom in, you can see now that we've got this nice sort of cut-in steep rock effect as well, and also the rocks blending nicely into the snow where things are steep. And I think that looks pretty good. And that brings us to the end of this tutorial. So thanks very much for hanging in there. It was quite a long one, and if you watched the whole thing, then your stamina is definitely next level. Hopefully you learned something along the way though, and if you did enjoy it, then please leave me a like. I really appreciate it, and we have more tutorials coming soon.